Hi, everyone. So today it's a little bit different. We have a special type of video in that I'm here with my friend from the university, and we're going to discuss different aspects of AI within education, as well as aspects of philosophy and a little bit of ethics. So I want to start off by introducing my friend here. This is Stephen Donatel. He is an author, presenter. He currently works as a university lecturer, and he has been working at different institutions throughout Armenia, and now he works here at the American University of Armenia. And what are the classes that you're currently teaching?
So I'm teaching the freshman seminar class, both the first semester and the second semester of it, and then I have a great books in political philosophy.
Political philosophy. Okay, great. So that's where the philosophy aspect comes in. Great. So I have a series of different questions that I'm going to be posing to Stephen here. But again, the big thing is that we're going to focus on how this applies within the world of education. So the first one here, Stephen, deals with you specifically in the classes that you're teaching. Have you changed in any way what you're doing as far as your pedagogy now that we have AI, ChatGPT?
Yeah, in general, with my teaching, I try to keep things fresh and try to do things, every semester a little bit of something new. But with ChatGPT, GPT, please scoop that up. It's one of the things that it's brought me back to doing is to having students write more in class. Okay. Typically, there's a reading every week or every class period, and I would often do a quiz, but it would just be short answers or maybe even just fill in the blank stuff. What I've shifted to now, about halfway through this semester, is having them do actually reflections. So like a short little essay. Instead of giving them 5 minutes to answer 5 short little questions, I'll give them 10 minutes and give them a prompt and have them write about the text that they were supposed to read.
So is this like a formative assessment type of thing?
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, part of the reason to do that is to make sure that they're doing the reading. But in terms of having them write it out as more of an essay sort of thing, one, I can start to sense their voice better and know that they're writing it because, they can send me papers or do forum posts on Moodle, that sort of stuff. And I would never really know if they're using, generative AI to produce those. Right. If I see them writing it in class, then I know that that's them and that's their voice and that's their level. And so I have a better, starting point to go from when I'm trying to gauge whether or not the assignments that they do at home and hand it to me. Okay, whatever. So and too, one of the things, it's not just about the students using the AI to create writing. OpenAI is working on a project right now. My understanding is that it's summarizing texts. And so one of the things that I'm concerned about is whether or not my students are actually reading texts, or whether they're feeding them into some AI machine and asking for summary. Because primarily what I'm trying to teach is not the material, but also just the skills of reading the material. Yeah. And the Great Books in Philosophy course, it's difficult material. It's difficult essays, difficult parts of books. And it's not just that they learn what the philosopher is trying to say, it's that they get experience with reading that sort of writing and being familiar with it, being able to understand it.
So that's a great point, and that's something that we really need to grab onto. In that, and John Warner talks about this a lot too. In a previous video, sort of broke down what his thoughts were. But this all comes back to this idea of what are we doing? What's the purpose of the assessment? What's the purpose of the assignment? Those are key things that we have to make sure in academia, more so now than ever, is that we have to understand, well, why are you doing this? And in some cases, it's totally going to be fine where the purpose of me giving you this assignment is because I want to make sure that you can create this end product. That's perfectly fine. That's totally fine, because as someone that graduates from the university, they need to be able to create the product. If their job requires them to create a report, they need to be able to create that report. But that's not the only thing. There's definitely multiple things that we could be teaching them. The end product is one. The other thing is everything that you just talked about. So now the process of going through and reading the material, the process of writing things out, that's where I need to learn these different skills, the comprehension skills, critical thinking, ability to summarize, ability to understand these complex texts. I think that's extremely important. Now, I'm definitely an AI fanboy, right? So I can definitely see situations where that's not what I'm necessarily teaching them. It could be instances where, let's say that end report, that's the main thing I'm teaching them. The fact that they're using an AI to create that end report, perfectly fine. I might even encourage them and properly teach them how to use AI in the right way. That's where the AI literacy comes in. So now I'm teaching them how to use AI in the right way to create this generative report that's being made. And again, a big part of that would be still using critical thinking to make sure that it's correct. But my big thing that I'm trying to achieve is for them to be able to create this report. So that's the big assessment there. But there are those other components. And I'm also assuming that these other, basically the basic skills and understanding of what right looks like have already been taught in a previous class, like maybe in your class, right? So there you go. You go through your class, you gain those skills in that in more advanced class. Now I can focus on other things like, here it is, how to create this text using an AI, how to use the tool specifically. So that's one of the big things that I've been trying to push through my Center of Teaching and Learning at this university, is this idea of empowering the instructor. The instructor is making this conscious decision of, yes, I'm using AI for this assignment. No, I'm telling my students, don't use AI because I'm trying to focus on these types of skills. So can you tell me more about maybe incorporation or specific times when you tell students not to use AI?
So I've taken a pretty strict line on whether they can use it in my class or not. Mm-hmm. I've told them, of course it's hard to count.
Sure.
But I've said if I find that you're using generative AI to produce your papers, then I'll fail you, period.
In the class that you're teaching right now, it's freshman seminar, so that's
freshman seminar.
And that's big, all sorts of writing there. And then now your other class, philosophy class, what level is that?
That's mostly seniors, but some juniors as well. So it's upper division.
So that's upper division.
Okay. Yeah. And again, I mean, we're going through with this political philosophy class from Plato up to contemporary political philosophers, political theorists. And one of the things that, I had to break from their expectations right away was, we're not going to find answers, right? I mean, we're going to go through this whole, 2,000 years, more than 2,000 years of different thinkers, and see the different ways that they understood things like freedom and, communal meaning. And so there is no answer.
Right.
Because the time period that the different writers were writing in had a different environment. They had different concerns. They had different worries than we do today. And so the point is not for them to learn what Plato had to say and memorize it and be able to regurgitate it because they may use it someday. Mm-hmm. No, it's for them to think about it, to understand it, to question it, to be hopefully somewhat accepting, but also somewhat critical of these ideas, because it's having those things in there, having been able to think through those things, having those thoughts in the sort of the storeroom of their brain, and having gone through the exercise, the practice of thinking about these things and comparing and contrasting, will give them not just questions of politics today, like freedom and meaning, whatever, but just give them the ability to wrestle with difficult and abstract questions. I mean, I don't see, I'm definitely a historical relativist in my philosophy and philosophical positions. And so it's not that somebody found the answer, it's there are new questions. We have new questions because we have a new environment, we have new concerns. And so looking back at the history of philosophy and thinking through those things is a way of getting us to a point where we can look out at the world and try to figure out what questions are we asking that we think are important. And so, yeah, I mean, even though that's an upper division course, my emphasis in it is really on that they're doing, that they're struggling with these complex texts.
Right. And that's where the real learning comes.
Yeah. And so if they just put, Weber's vocational lecture on science into, ChatGPT and say, give me a summary of this, and it spits out a summary.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, they'll understand some of what Weber was trying to say, but they'll understand it on a simpler level, on a basic level, that isn't necessarily something that can help them think in a way or learn to think in a way that will help them think about our current problems.
That totally makes sense, because what you're doing with your class is trying to get depth as opposed to just exposure. Yeah. So now I'm gonna challenge my friend here, right? Didn't know I was gonna ask him this. So again, full empowerment for the instructor. Instructor is deciding these things. But I'm gonna challenge you here and say the big thing that we in academia need to realize is this new reality of ChatGPT, AIs being all around, becoming more than just what we initially think of it as. So I can totally agree. I can even agree, right, on having a course like Stephen's here and saying, hey, we're going to have different assignments. I want you to struggle with the text. I want you to read through all of it. Don't have it just summarized for you. All the different essays, I don't want you to use ChatGPT to write an essay for you. I want you to struggle with it. That's going to be part of this overall process for you to get deep learning. Fully agree with that implementation for this type of class. Again, the class is a little bit different. So my challenge to you is, do you see where an advanced language model like ChatGPT could still be used within the class on an individual student level to obtain the actual student learning objectives of what you're wanting? And again, if we use the AI in different ways. I'll give you an example. What am I to do as a student? I did the reading. I struggled. I did all the reading. I go to you in the class. We have a discussion. It's still above my head. What can I do now in order to enhance my comprehension so that I can fulfill the task of writing that essay once we get to it? But again, I'm still not comprehending. Do you see an area where a tool like ChatGPT could still help to facilitate the learning process without it doing the work for the student, without it taking away from the student's process of learning? I told you this would be challenging.
Yeah. No. And I guess in that respect, what I've heard people talk about is having the generative AI act as a personal tool, so that you can ask it questions and it will give you an answer. It will give you an explanation. And if you don't understand that explanation, then you can ask it for a different one. And it will be able to do this over and over again.
Like a conversation.
Yeah. And you won't, it won't think, oh my gosh, I've got something else to do right now, where you just stop asking questions and understand this already.
Get frustrated.
It won't do that because it can't, right? That's an interesting idea. But I wonder, that's an interesting idea because it is kind of what we do in class.
Right.
With one another. I ask students what they think of this, what they think of that. They ask me for an explanation. Maybe I have to redo it, whatever. I hesitate. To a certain extent, maybe that's useful. And I guess if the student is doing that, I wouldn't be so, that would be maybe a productive or a useful way to use generative AI?
Still within the scopes of the limitations that you've expressed, for sure. Within the class.
But I'm really skeptical of what this generative AI is and how it, in fact, understands things. I just found it today, sort of listening to it, only a little ways into it. But Lex Friedman's podcast with
Sam Altman.
Altman, and Altman is he's very good at acknowledging the limitations and everything. And he, a few times already in just the first, I think maybe 20 minutes of the video, he's called for like restraint in. Have you listened to it?
I saw. The last video that I uploaded was actually a compression of the 2.5 hours into about 30 minutes.
Watch that.
You gotta watch that.
But in the beginning, he's cautioning against. Altman is cautioning against personifying.
Yes.
And I think that's incredible. That's great, right? It's not a human being. It's not
sentient.
It's not sentient. Yeah. So, but at the same time, I had to laugh because they're talking about it understanding the questions. Yeah. They're talking about it struggling.
Yeah.
It looks like it's struggling to answer the questions correctly. It's clear that it understands them. And my thought there is, isn't that personifying it already?
Yeah. And he even acknowledges this, that it's very difficult to start to talk about this without in some way flipping over to that, right? Because when we talk about, and even saying the word understand, it understood my question. And then you get to other things like creativity, right?
Yeah.
Because it can create different things. So there's all this definitely this gray zone about it. And we've had different discussions about this before. And again, thank you for giving me that type of response with a challenging question. And it is an important thing to really ponder, because on some levels we could respond by saying, well, we still don't need this AI, right? A student, they should be forming study groups. They should be going to student success centers where they could get one-on-one use with other students, other instructors. They have professionals there. No one is saying to get rid of that. I strongly encourage those things in the right way at the right time. I view this AI as being this tool that can also help to facilitate and empower the student and the instructor to be able to do our education in an even more advanced way. Because you will have certain students that are different, that need additional type of analogies or explanations, and we could use AI to help with that. We could use AI to create scaffolding ahead of time. Say, hey, if you're not understanding this part specifically, use this exact prompt in ChatGPT to get you this type of explanation. Or we're going to be having a test, so here's a prompt that I want you to use with ChatGPT, and you can ask it to like quiz me on the following. And it's very structured because you have to ask it in the right way. That's what prompt engineering is all about. But it's this: quiz me on this topic and wait for my response. After I respond, give me feedback, and then ask me another question. So if you don't ask it in the right way, it's just going to. So having those tools, I think, is going to be really beneficial for us to move forward, because there's an ongoing sort of debate and issues when I talk on Twitter or when I talk with other instructors. I have lots of instructors that are asking me, what's the new pedagogy to use? What is this new way that we should be using AI, and that's the new pedagogy? I always revert back, and we've had a little bit of discussion with this. I always revert back saying, I don't think there should be a new pedagogy. I don't think there should be this is the new method of instruction with AI. I think it should still be the fundamentals of student-centered instruction, of active learning, active engagement. You're using AI as a tool. That's all it is a tool, but we have to understand how to use that tool. And that's a big thing that goes back to my big thing of AI literacy in general.
Yeah.
But this kind of goes into this next question.
Okay.
And then you can fill in with the rest of that part, right? It talks about AI in making sure that the AI is free of bias and discrimination. What is, as instructors, what are your thoughts on that as far as how can we help to ensure that we're using a tool that doesn't have bias, that's not introducing discrimination or bias, and simply using the tool itself? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot. And it goes back to where I kind of ended before, when we say that the AI is understanding, we are personified. And what we need to make, I mean, maybe it is understanding in some way, but it's not understanding in the same way that we understand. It doesn't read in the same way that we read. My understanding of it is that it goes through and it finds relationships and patterns in huge chunks of text data, right? We read that way. If we want to call that reading, we need to be very clear about the fact that, we can call what it's doing reading, but it's a very different type of reading than what we do. We look at things and are looking for meaning of words and the way that the words connect to our physical reality or our own emotional state. The AI isn't doing that, right? Its reality is simply its text data. And so if it is understanding, if it is reading, if it is thinking, it's doing so in a very different way than we are. And there are going to be some strengths to that. Obviously, even Alan Turing says in his paper about thinking machines, if we want to get a machine to pass the imitation game, we're going to probably have to make it make mistakes on complex mathematics. Because a giveaway that it's a machine will be that it can do complex mathematics very quickly and without any error. Okay, great. So there are it thinks differently, it understands differently, it reads differently than we do. And some things it'll be able to do better than us, some things it may never be able to do that we can do. And I think it's very important to keep all of that in mind, right? I mean, when you talk, if you have a dog, if you have a pet, and you talk to it, we say, it understands when I tell it to sit. But does it literally understand that word and that concept? Or is it your body language and your tone of voice? I mean, how is the dog understanding? We say that it's understanding, and we love to personify our pets.
Yeah.
Right? But they're not human. Then I think we need to keep that awareness in terms of artificial intelligence as well. Now, how does that come into bias? What was it? It was bias and discrimination. Well, I mean, it thinks differently than we do.
Right.
It understands differently than we do. It also is going to have a different understanding of the world, a different understanding, and it's going to be, they're programmed and then they learn through interaction with humans.
Yeah.
And through interaction with text, not interaction with text, but by analyzing text. It has a different perspective than we do. To a certain extent, it might have the perspective that it's programmed to have.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And that can be a problem. Right. I worry, like I said before, I'm very much a historical relativist when it comes to philosophy. So what do you mean by discrimination? What do you mean by bias? Those words change definition over time.
Right.
And what's acceptable and not acceptable is never the same. And so what do we mean when we're talking about bias and discrimination? And I think in the West especially, we have a hard time at this point coming up with a common definition of those things, an understanding of those things.
Yeah, I think you're.
So what I'm worried about, is that we may believe that the AI systems can be without bias or can be without discrimination, but I don't think they ever can be. I think it's more about understanding what the bias and the discrimination is, being aware of it, and not letting us think get fooled into thinking that it is completely unbiased and it doesn't discriminate. Because it will. My philosophical position is that everything does.
Yeah.
What I really would fear is that we think that the AI doesn't at all.
Okay.
And then we take it as some sort of an authority
Right.
and we let it shape us.
Okay, so hold that, because I think we're getting into another whole venue, which is really great, which I want to go down. But going back to this question specifically, I totally agree. And I think that the question itself is a trick question.
I think so too. Yeah, I think you're right.
Because it's like, going back to Plato again, it's like, oh, so you want the perfect answer. You want the perfect system. Well, according to the description that Plato gives, that'll last for this long, right? And then it's gone. So if you were to say something controversial and say, well, morality or using ethics, this is the correct answer. And it totally would be the correct answer for this whole group of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But now this whole group of people will say, no, that's bias, that's discrimination, that's all wrong. Okay, so let's flip it. Oh, well, now they all agree with it. But now all these people disagree. So I don't think we could ever have something. And I think that the best way to look at it is saying, well, there will be bias in the system because it's based off of the data. Now, with GPT-4, one of the new powers of GPT-4, and again, it's not fully accessible yet, but in reading the technical paper talking about it, one of the new abilities is that you'll be able to access specific data. Right? So the example that they give is like a database dealing with UN reports. So you could say, based off of this data set, here's my question, and I want you to answer. So now it's looking specifically there, but it still can't do that. It can't truly just look at the data set. Why? Because it's using a large language model in order to be able to understand, to be able to speak properly. So it still has to have some components of that. And then for factual information, be pulling from the data set. But there still could be some bias that's introduced in some way. So I think a key part of that, going back to AI literacy, is to make sure that we understand that, our students understand that, hey, there could be some bias. That's why it's important for us to look at the information from multiple perspectives. Now, in the interview that you were talking about, one of the things that came out of a similar type of question is the importance of presenting information in the right way. So if you ask me a question, and again, I'm trying to be completely free of bias, I'm trying to be non-discriminatory. You ask me a question of, let's say, flat Earth. That, hey, tell me reasons why the Earth is flat. All right, well, okay, I'm an academic. I've read stuff about this. But in presenting the information, if I'm trying to be bias-free, I would give you information saying, here are some theories. Here's what other people have said with sources. There's no specific levels of high academic individuals that agree that this is correct. So here's some sources of information. Here's some counter arguments to that. I'm not going to make a judgment for you. Why? Because you're asking for information. Yeah. So again, the way that information is delivered. Now, going back to that other part that we were going down that rabbit hole, right, which is great, is, we have to be really careful with that, because if we at any point say that here's the system, here's the AI that is free of all those human limitations and only has the correct facts, and now it's giving us the answer, and now we're going to start to totally depend and rely on a system that we created that now we think is perfect. That's really dangerous as far as making all sorts of different decisions for us moving forward. So, so how do we prevent something like that from occurring? Because it'll become a black box, right? This black box that people will start to think is perfect, but if we don't even understand how it's working.
Yeah. Well, and that's, we have to, I think we have, well, I'm going to start with this, because it's related. This quote, I say it all the time, right? My favorite quote about AI, it's Hubert Dreyfus from his book, What Computers Still Can't Do. And it says, what we need to be worried about is not the advent of super intelligent computers, butt of sub-intelligent human beings, right? He was very, very skeptical that we could have human level artificial intelligence. That artificial intelligence could do a lot of things, but it will never be quite human and will never really be beyond human.
So, okay, so AGI, that's general intelligence, so that means that we're equal to human. But the next step is super intelligence, or AI.
And he points out, Dreyfus points out some very significant philosophical problems with this. Ontological problems. How do we as human beings understand, categorize, and interact with the things in our world?
Right.
We don't all do it the same way. Is there a perfect way to do it? Right? And if we as human beings can't decide on those questions, how are we going to program that into an AI? Okay, and then there's the epistemological question. How do we know that something's true? And we struggle with that as human beings. And I mean, just look, from Newtonian physics to Einsteinian physics to quantum theory, right? They're all true in various ways, and we tend to see them as being progressively truer, but that's not necessarily the case, right? So if we have a hard time as human beings trying to figure out what's true, then how are we going to program that into a machine?
Yeah.
Whatever we program into the machine is going to have issues and problems, right? And so we need to be skeptical of it.
Yeah.
We need to keep, if we trust it too much, and this is the thing, Dreyfus, I think, believes that the machines can't be more intelligent than us. What will make us stupid is if we believe that they're more intelligent than us and we just blindly trust them and just keep giving them things to do and get detached from one another. This is why I have reservations about using it as a personal tutor, because we should still be interacting with one another.
Sure.
As we interact with one another, we keep community, we keep humanity at a certain level. We keep in touch with the physical world that we live in. That's part of the reason why this augmented reality or the metaverse or whatever makes me worried. Because the further we get away from things that are inconvenient and difficult, the more we're going to be sucked into trusting the AI and letting it do everything for us. We need to have the inconvenience sometimes. We need to have this conflict, this struggle, in order to be one, in touch with the world around us, the people around us, the things around us, right? But then also, when we have that, then we can also be skeptical and push back on the AI, because it is going to need to keep on learning. It's going to need to keep on changing and evolving. Not in terms of necessarily it getting better or more perfect, but in terms of the environment around it is changing.
Yeah.
And it needs to evolve to keep up with that. And not evolution in terms of like towards some goal or some perfection, but evolution in I think what is actually the true Darwinian sense. Evolution is adaptation to the environment.
Right, to the current now.
To the current now.
Yeah.
And doing so in ways that makes us more flexible in how we can evolve to unforeseeable changes in the future.
Right.
And so if we get too locked in to the AI, and when we deal with people, when we deal with the physical world, there's always messiness. There's always something that, somebody gets frustrated, somebody's having a bad day, so you don't know.
Right.
And so you have to have that flexibility. It's an uncertainty. It's an uncomfortableness sometimes. It's really inconvenient sometimes to actually have to deal with real people, right?
Yeah.
But we have to keep doing that. And we can't just go to the AI because it's easier and it's more comfortable, at least not all the time. Right. Because the AI is going to need to adapt to its surroundings. We're going to need to adapt to our surroundings. And so, just not letting it be about black box, not letting it be what we go to out of habit all of the time. We can use it, great. There is going to be elements about it that we're never going to be able to understand. It's about ourselves and about each other that we'll never be able to understand. But just keeping things open, keeping things flexible, because we need to adapt.
So yeah, I think the flexibility, the adaptation part is going to be super important. And part of what you're addressing was also even brought up by OpenAI themselves. In a recent technical paper that they released, they talked about the issue of over-reliance, which is exactly an aspect of what you're saying, in that by being over-reliant on the AI, we'll start to lose skills, which makes total sense. And it'll also prevent us from learning new skills, which is a big danger. And, I just gave a presentation I was asked to be a guest lecturer at a professional communications course. So in there, one of the big things that I talk about is this aspect of you need to maintain the fundamental skills for your own benefit. The idea there was, okay, I use AI to create a report. So here's my report, and I'm giving that to the vice president. Well, we talked about AI literacy to be able to go through, and before you ever give something to someone else, if your name is on there, your credibility is on the line. So you have to be able to critically think, to go through and check the figures, check the data, make sure it's all correct and make sure it's logical. But then that goes back to this other aspect of losing skills and not being able to gain new skills. And what you talked about even before, how am I even going to know what right looks like? How will I know that this is a good report? How will I know that this will be beneficial if I don't at least maintain that ability, maintain that struggle of going through it? This is going to take time. Efficiency is great, but not to the point where we've taken ourselves out of the equation and it's no longer really logical for us to benefit from the system itself. So I think those are definitely key points that we have to keep pushing in academia. And this idea of keep pushing back and saying, no, it can't just exist as a black box. That's going to be an ongoing struggle because Sam Altman even mentioned, I think it was him, or it might have just been in the report where they're talking about how it's getting close to being able, and they're thinking that GPT-5 will definitely be containing these aspects of being able to just go through and fix itself, and being able to improve on itself. So now you would have to have that in order to ever get to super intelligence, but that's a very scary thing because then you have this thing that could escalate very quickly, very fast, as far as improvements, and to the point where we don't even understand what's going on. So that's definitely a big thing. What you were mentioning. Let me go on with another question here. So let's just jump here to a big question that I want to ask. Right? So, what can you imagine? This deals with education. You can expand it if you want. Let's look at life in 5 years. 5 years from now. Now, this question comes from NVIDIA. NVIDIA came out a few weeks ago and said that within 10 years, that because of their escalation in their systems and their capabilities with AI, that they're predicting that AI will be 1,000,000 times more powerful in 10 years. 1,000,000 times. That's too much to even comprehend. So let's go 5 years. And I actually think this will happen in less than 5 years, but let's go 5 years into the future. What do you think life will be like if we have an AI like ChatGPT that's 1,000 times more powerful? So we have GPT-4 right now. If it were to be 1,000 times more powerful, and again, let me give you more of an operational definition. 1,000 times more capable as far as less hallucinations. So it's 1,000 times better in giving you the correct answer. 1,000 times better in making information presented to you in a sophisticated way. Whatever level you want of sophistication, it can give it to you as far as the perfect write-up. It can quote its sources. It can give you references, give you information the right way, present its line of thinking, everything. So 1,000 times more powerful. How do you think that would affect education? How do you think that would affect society?
I am going to be a real skeptic here.
Okay.
And say, I don't even, 1,000 times more capable in the ways that you explained. But again, going back to this idea of having to adapt and evolve, right? I mean, as human beings change, it's going to have to adapt to us. As it changes, we're going to adapt to it.
Right.
I don't know if I can see either one of those things as clearly an arc of improvement, right? I mean, it will become more capable, but will change, and then it will have to adapt to us. And that's what I'm most concerned about. That's what worries me the most about AI, is this idea of how dependent on it will we become? How much will we trust it?
Right.
Because the more we trust it, the more power we give it over us. The more power we give it over us, the more we're at risk of losing skills, losing knowledge, losing humanity. And then how will it adapt to us?
Right.
And I don't even know. I mean, if it's modifying itself and it's adapting to what we are becoming, as it should, right? And then we're adapting to it. I mean, it's this relation. In the long run, where is that going to end up? So no, I mean, if it's more powerful and more capable in the simple way that you put it, I'm skeptical of that. But in the simple way that we put it, how will things be in 5 years? Well, it all depends on how much we trust it.
Yeah. So
how much we trust it.
That's a great point.
And so if we don't trust, if we don't give it blind trust,
right,
then we won't be letting it take over.
Yeah.
Right. And then we'll be using it as a tool. And you know, there's the thing about when do tools become more than tools? When do tools become meaningful, maybe even sacred objects? You know, for primitive humans, you know, a hammer or a knife, right, may have been so important to their survival that it is just a tool, but they're not treating it as a tool in the way that they think about it, or the way that they may have embodied or given it some sort of like divine power or you know, some supernatural elements, because they've realized how important it is, right? Ritual, we would say superstitious.
Yeah.
If we start to give that to AI, then I think we're really in trouble, right? And so it needs to be demythologized. We need to remember that it's just a tool, and that it's not the answer to all of our problems. It's not a panacea. I don't know. I mean, the human tendency to want easy answers.
Yeah.
Human tendency to want to be easy. Right? Could lead us down a path where we really are treating it as some sort of a deity.
So
and then who knows what's going to happen.
It's funny that you went to this, right? Because I'm actually planning a different video where I'm going to address that. So maybe we'll work on that together, right? But we can talk specifically about that. But I want to jump back to this whole issue of trust, because that's one of the things that I've been thinking about as well. One of the things with GPT-4 is that it can view content. It has visual capabilities now. So you can feed it images, feed it stuff. But the other part of that is that it can also then translate. So it can go from text to image. It can go from text to video. So it can create video from audio, whatever. You give it instructions and it'll make this video. It's still developing, but that's going to quickly improve. So we're going to get to the point where, deepfake, that's so easy. I just tell it this and it's a perfect video. So I can envision a time where, no, if in order for us to trust it, it has to go through like a special verified video source. So then the question would then be like, okay, well, who's verifying it, right? If it's like only from the White House, Is that verified? So now they're controlling all the information on what's right and wrong. I mean, we've had plenty of problems with the White House, with the governments, and that's our government in the United States. What about other governments? Who's going to verify all of that content? So the forensics of all this is going to be super important. But yeah, how do we maintain trust in that system? And I'm arguing for we're going to be untrusting, but it's going to be so easy to simply trust. Simply say, you have so many people that with social media, they'll sign their life away, privacy concerns, I don't care, just give me the content. I think there's going to be a lot of that in the future where people are just going to blindly say, oh, okay, if AI says so, then I guess we should do it. That's the real danger for sure. And I do, like you, I see the possibility, at least, for that happening in the future. I can totally see current tools being 1,000 times more capable with authenticity as far as, man, this looks perfect. Some of the text that ChatGPT and other AIs come up with, yeah, that's an error, this is an error. I think we're going to get to a point where the factual stuff will be fully correct. Now, we still have to worry about the logic aspect, because everything could be correct. It's still not a logical conclusion. And even the fact that we're talking about logic, well, logic is only as good as the data points that we're feeding it, right? And then the conclusion has to be correct. But even then, there could be multiple things that are right, and that boils down to a morality question. And then it also boils down to, okay, you're telling me this as if it's a correct answer, but what we have to do is weighted means. We have to decide, this is the course of action, this is what's going to be the result. Is that better than the result that's going to come over here? There's pros and cons for both things. So I think we can't ever think that there's going to be this perfect system that will give us perfect answers. It's always going to have to be a human decision to weigh those things, to balance things out.
Yeah, I mean, goals and values are things that I don't know. I don't believe that science can ever uncover those. I think those are things that we as human beings have to decide on in very, very human ways. Right?
The things they change.
And they change. They change.
Values and goals.
So, yeah. I think it was Sam Harris believes that science can uncover some sort of natural morality or natural ethics. I don't buy it. Not one bit. Right? I mean, if you do that, you're smuggling in your values into the scientific process that you're using to try to find them. And so I don't think so. So yeah, there's always going to be, the logic is directed towards a goal. The logic has values in it. So yeah, I mean, what are the two? The climate change and the paperclip examples, right? If we set up this AI, this super intelligent AI, to make as many paperclips as possible and don't give it any other restrictions. I think it's Chalmers and somebody else that talked about this. Well, at some point, it will turn everything into paperclips, right? Because it has no other values. It has that goal. It doesn't do cost-benefit analysis. Right. It'll look at you and say, how many paperclips can I get out of you and how? Right. And then the same thing with climate change. We could make this super intelligent computer and say, fix climate change, and it could figure the best way to do it is just to kill all the humans. Right. Yeah. I'll just wipe out all the humans.
Yeah, it has to be the understanding of the values and the goals. That's a great way to put it.
But then, I mean, with deep fakes and all of that kind of stuff too, I think the biggest way that we're going to have to, and we live in such a globalized world. We live in a world where we feel like we know, and we feel like we're part of things that we don't actually physically see. Sometimes ever. Yeah. You were talking about the White House, Joe Biden. Have you ever seen that man in person? Right. Yeah. Right. But we see him all the time. We think we know him. We think we know things about him. Right. Do you even know anybody who knows him? How far removed are we from these people that have so much power and influence over our life? And that's what I think what makes deepfakes and that sort of thing so much really, really scary, right? Because like I said before, get in touch with the reality around you. Be able to, to call BS on something that you see online that doesn't seem like it fits with what you're experiencing in the real world.
Right.
Now, the more those things that we see online are outside of our everyday physical reality, the more distant they are from us, the harder it is for us to be able to judge that sort of thing. And that can be but definitely, I think spending time in the real world, spending time with people, spending time with things will help us keep, Neil Postman talks about having a good BS detector.
Right.
And I think being in the world and with people, struggling with things, not letting things just be as easy as they possibly can, will help us keep our, those detectors calibrated and in tune.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that sort of goes in, if we're bringing it all the way back to the classroom, right? Because you do need a BS detector there to see where students are straying as far as what we're trying to get them to understand and seeing the value of the process. Once again, what would you tell instructors as far as other instructors who are struggling with these different aspects? As far as, well, how can I detect that the AI is being used? What should I do? Those types of concerns that often get brought up.
I mean, there are some good checkers out there that I use, but I'm not going to. They're changing all the time,
right?
And so you have to, every time I get a round of papers for my students, I go through and I check them and I see if there's something else new out there that I try it a little bit. I've spent so much time on that this semester.
So you do advocate for AI detection?
Yeah, I do. Okay. I do. But again, even that has to be taken with a grain of salt, because what is it trying to detect? We're not even, and so that's a whole. But again, you have to get to know your students.
Right.
You have to, and this is in the classes that I teach, I can say this and wholeheartedly believe it, that the end product is not really what this is about. Mm-hmm. You want to have a good end product, but if you have a good end product, that shows that you've gone through the process.
Right.
And by going through the process, you're learning the skills. You're improving those skills. And I spend a lot of time. I've always spent time, for at least the last decade, in my classroom talking about that, talking about the importance of that.
The formative assessments to leading up to.
Well, not just that, but I mean, just it's you're here not to produce a paper. You're here to learn how to produce a paper. Right? I have to read and grade your paper, and there's importance in the final product, and there's importance in the grade. But really, why you're here at the school, at the university, is not to produce that paper. Right. It's to learn the skills, to perfect the skills
or the topic,
or I mean, content, to learn about the topic.
Yeah.
But in the way that the world moves so fast these days, anything you learn now could be obsolete.
Right.
Or it could be, I mean, look, they're doing all these crazy experiments in physics. They could come up with something beyond quantum theory. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, that information wouldn't be useless. Those theories aren't useless, but then there's something new that you have to, again, going back to Neil Postman, and I don't think this has ever really been adopted, but he advocated for teaching, especially like in the sciences and in history. Teaching not just the theory and how it works, but the story of how and even why it was discovered. Yeah. So that you know how it came about, so that if there are faults in it, or if a new superseding theory or a new superseding piece of information comes, you can understand, well, this is what we thought, and this is how it came about. And so we could kind of see maybe the shortcomings of that, or the process that led up to it. Now all of a sudden somebody came up with a better process and fixed some of those shortcomings. And so it's a matter of not just knowing the material, but knowing about the material so that you can understand when things change, so that you can have that detector and be able to say, hey, this doesn't seem right.
Right.
Not just that I've learned it and I've learned this and it's true. Okay, yeah, it's true now. Why is it true? Because if it changes, or if you see something similar to it and you need to judge how true or reliable is that something that's similar, if all you've done is learned what's true, then you're not going to be able to evaluate or judge other things in a anything more than a black and white way. I know what's true. Anything that isn't that is false. Black and white. No, that gets us into trouble.
Yep.
Right. And so knowing more in depth about these things.
And that's exactly it. I think what you're referring to right now is deep learning, right?
Yeah.
Really understanding things at depth, having transformational learning where now you're becoming more of a subject matter expert, at least in some ways. I mean, we're basically talking about a bachelor's degree, but still at a university level, which is something more than just, oh, AI, give me the summary of this.
Yeah.
Because we're losing all that depth. Right. Okay, great, perfect. So I want to thank you for all this conversation. We've given the audience,
thank you for having me.
We've given the audience a lot to really think about here. And again, if you have questions or ideas, definitely put it in the comments, and we'll continue to have these type of discussions. The big thing with the YouTube channel is we're trying to build a community of inquiry where we pose these type of questions to one another, to the community, and continue to develop and think about these things so that we can address this new AI phenomenon in a positive way and really use it as a tool, not as something to simply rely upon. Again, together we can find all these solutions. And remember, learning
is for life.